You're listening to Streetside, the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition podcast.
Hello and welcome to Streetside, the official podcast of the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition. I'm your host today, Michael Brennan, and I am delighted to be speaking with Father Greg Boyle from Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Father Greg.
It's great to be with you.
Okay, preliminary question. What do you want me to call you? Are you Father Greg, Father
Just
Boyle?
Call me Greg. Call me Greg.
Greg. Okay, you can call me Michael. Yeah,
Okay.
we're so happy to have you here today. And I am going to ask you to introduce yourself. Most of our listeners would know of you and your work, but take a moment and tell us, who is Greg Boyle and what does he do on a good day?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm a Jesuit. I'm here in Los Angeles. I'm the founder of Homeboy Industries. It's the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet Earth. 10,000 people walk through those doors every year. It felt like they walk through the doors today. It's been one of those days. And, it's a kind of a place where we have 14 social enterprises. Healing is kind of the centerpiece of our 18-month what we call training program. And trainees come and they work on themselves and they try to excavate the wounds a little and try to figure out what happened to them, and so that they can become sturdy and resilient and leave here after 18 months. And we hope to find them a job as they leave.
Fantastic.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you for all you do and you have been doing for decades. And I wanna tell you that your book Cherished Belonging really struck a chord with me. I've listened to it 4 times since it came out on election day. I had my book club of 15 guys read it this summer and discuss it on the back deck, and I've bought 30 copies and given it to all my friends, family, and coworkers. So I'd like to start with Cherished Belonging, recognizing that our listeners are mostly frontline workers. We got social workers, peer advocates, nurse practitioners, PAs, doctors that are doing street medicine and taking care of the unhoused population. Cherished Belonging really resonates with us. Um, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to unpack the 2 central precepts of cherished belonging.
Oh, you're going to ask me what those 2 precepts are?
Yeah,
I
I don't want to steal. I don't want to steal your thunder.
Is it about being unshakably good and belong to us? Yeah.
No exceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the overriding guidelines here at Homeboy, is that everybody's unshakably good, no exceptions, and we belong to each other and no exceptions. And so it's my sense that you could draw a straight line between those two, embracing those 2 ideas and our ability to roll up our sleeves and address every complex, vexing social dilemma that faces us, if we believe those 2 things. So if we believe those things, what would it compel us to do in terms of the unhoused or mass incarceration, or dealing with the fact that, as the Surgeon General says, the former Surgeon General, that mental health is the defining health issue of our time? All these things would, I think, dissipate. We would just simply, they would fall into place. And the problem is that we have this lurking notion that perhaps maybe there are some people that don't belong to us, and that there are good people and bad people. And as long as we have that idea that there are good people and bad people, we're not that compelled to help the unhoused or to care about people who go away to prison. Or it keeps us from addressing crime or all these other things that we'd love to have a handle on. But precisely because we don't believe those 2 things, we don't embrace them, that it really keeps us from solution. So I guess that's the premise of the book. But I need somebody who's read it or listened to it 4 times to tell me if I'm right here.
You're perfect. You're perfect. And I'm gonna start with the macro level, and then I'd like to really bring it down to the frontline work that we're doing with the unhoused. But at the macro level, your book was published on election day for a reason. I think divinely ordained. And we're going through some very difficult political times as a nation, very divided. And It is easy for those of us who have taken a stand with and for the poor and the marginalized to demonize some of the leadership, such as Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, and you know, make them the evil actors in this unfolding drama. And you have spoken very eloquently about no, they are also unshakably good, and they are unwell. And I want to share with you my protest sign. When I go to protest here in Rochester, it says increase funding for treatment of malignant narcissism. And so I'm with you on the unwellness. But could you say a word about that? Just, we're in dangerous political times, and your precept of everyone is unshakably good needs to be applied to our current reality.
Yeah, well, let me back up just a little bit. The book was supposed to come out sometime in October. So it came out on election day because the author couldn't get his act together. And that's the reason. So it was decidedly supposed to be way pre-election, or at least a month before. But instead it came out on the exact election day, which was not by design. It was just sort of an accident. But having said that, yeah, I think it's important. Part of the thing is our language sometimes trips us up. If we say ill, people have an issue with it. If you say sick, people have an issue with it. But and people are real quick to say of Donald Trump, for example, deranged, demented, unhinged, untethered from reality. None of those things are insults. All of those things are diagnoses. You're really just naming it correctly. If you can insist, and I find it's easy to do, to just say, no, there's nobody. Gang members have taught me there's no such thing as anybody who's bad or evil. Broken, traumatized, mentally anguished. All those things are true. But evil is just the least sophisticated way of talking about anything. So, like, I always go back to Jesus, and he was a man of his time, we have to admit. So he sees the guy having seizures, and he and the whole crowd are convinced that he's possessed by a demon, but he isn't. If Jesus were able to name this correctly in those days, he'd be able to say, no, he has epilepsy. Here's a pill. I think that'll help you control your seizures. But that doesn't shake my faith. That shapes my faith. So in the same way, it's unsophisticated to call somebody who's having epileptic seizures possessed by a demon. In the same way, to call whatever, Donald Trump or Stephen Miller, evil doesn't name it correctly. So, but my question sometimes is, even now where we talk, I read a psychologist was talking about it's not good for us to normalize the behavior of the president. And this person was talking about the kind of mean and cruel language, the insulting language, he called Letitia James, scum. And so that was the example they used. And they said, well, as normalized behavior. So I don't say normal, where people say, well, that's not normal to do that. Because then other people will say, well, maybe what we need is not normal. So instead I say, is it healthy for an adult to call another adult scum? No, you don't have to say bad or good. You just say, does a healthy person do that? And the answer that everybody will give is no. Or to send out a Christmas message, as Donald Trump did, that said, Merry Christmas, and may all my enemies rot in hell. No. Is that a healthy? So if you say, well, he speaks his mind and normal, no. Just ask yourself the question, does a healthy adult do that? Nobody needs to be a psychologist to know that he's not well. But you have to be well to know that he isn't. And that's kind of the test. And none of that touches your goodness. That's my point. It doesn't touch your goodness at all. So at the moment, we confuse, there's a whole bunch of folks in the United States of America who think mean and cruel is really tough and strong. But you have to be well to know, no, it's just mean and cruel. And because healthy people know the difference between mean and cruel and tough and strong. But if you don't, then you're at a rally in an arena and the lights dim and they show pictures of brown men in cages and the crowd starts to chant and cheer and say, USA, USA. Then you ask yourself the question, can you be a healthy adult and cheer when you see brown men in cages, having been perp walked off a plane and taken to a gulag in El Salvador? So, of course, none of this is a moral judgment. It's just a health assessment. And that's important because for me, it's not about morality. Healthy people, are holy people, and holy people are healthy people. And so when they talk about character or decency or morality, healthy people have a moral compass, not good people, because everybody's good. Donald Trump is unshakably good, but his ability to access that goodness and live from it is compromised by exactly the thing you say on that protest sign, malignant narcissism, and he's a sociopath. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I think I might try malignant narcissist today. No, nobody chooses that. It chooses him. It chose him. Now, it doesn't mean he can't get help, but he's compromised in his ability to even see that he needs help. This is where family members and people who love you come in and say, no, Dad, you're sending out tweets that say Merry Christmas and may all my enemies rot in hell. You need help. You can't run for president. That would have happened in my family if my dad had done something. We would have had an intervention the very next day. Because if you're healthy, that's what you do. So anyway, I could go on and on.
Well, and we love it when you go on and on, but and this speaks to your concept of kinship and your second precept of we belong to each other, and we take care of each other and we look out for each other when we call each other to accountability around that kind of behavior. I would like to take us off the macro national political stage and bring us down to street level. You're a frontline worker with gang members in Los Angeles. Those of us who do street medicine are out there with the unhoused who, we do our own reframing there as well, that we, instead of, people aren't addicted, they have substance use disorder. It's one of those reframings where it's a diagnosis that then is treatable. And those of us who do this frontline work, I was listening to one of your interviews the other night, and you were talking about the attitude that we bring to that work. And two books came to mind: Parker Palmer's "A Hidden Wholeness," in which we can't fix anybody, and then Henry Nouwen's "The Wounded Healer," where we bring our own brokenness into relationship with those who are broken on the margins, and their meet in this place where both can be healed. And you speak so eloquently about that. And I'd just like to give you an opportunity to talk about the approach that one needs to take when we move to the margins, when those of us with privilege move to the margins. What would you encourage in that movement?
Just a sort of parentheses fun fact: in 1981, when I was studying theology in Cambridge, I took a course at Harvard Divinity. And my teachers team taught Parker Palmer and Henry Nouwen team taught the class, and it was on ministry. And I remember
love it.
Henry was not that happy about Harvard. He only lasted a semester, and then he went to the L'Arche community after that, and then he died there. But anyway,
can I tell my brief Henry story?
Yeah.
I went to Notre Dame, and Henry taught at Notre Dame as well, so I knew him there. And then I worked in Lima, Peru, where Henry went to be a missionary, and wrote his book Gracias about that experience.
Yeah.
and I knew the same people. I lived with the same Mary Knoll priest. And so when I got back from that, I wrote Henry a letter, and he was at Daybreak at the large community in Toronto. And I said, Henry, I want to come visit you. And he said yes. And my wife and I got to go and have tea with Henry in his bedroom, and talk for hours. It was lovely.
Oh,
And
how sweet.
yeah, I'm gonna share with you one of Henry's pieces of wisdom, because we were talking to him. My wife and I spent 3 years in a rural village in Honduras when we got married, and we were working at a center for malnourished children, and the children would sometimes die in our arms, and people would come to our door all day, all night, looking for help. It was a horrible, brutal poverty that we were working with, and when the going got really rough, we would put the padlock on the outside of the door, climb in through the back window, and lie under the fan and eat M&Ms that we imported from the US. So that was our survival method.
Survival mode.
Yeah, and we asked Henry.
Were you in the Language Institute, Marino Institute
No, no, we were with
in
Concern
Cochabamba
America. No, no,
to learn
Honduras.
Spanish? Okay.
No, we'd already learned it. But the reason I'm telling that story is
Yeah.
because when we met with Henry, we said, Henry, tell us about how to say no. And he said, oh, I'm an expert in saying no. Everybody wants a chapter to a book. Everybody wants a retreat. Everybody wants a workshop. Everybody wants me to come and do something for them. He said, I have to say no hundreds of times a day. Saying no doesn't help me. It's what I say yes to that becomes my life, and that's what counts.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
good.
I'm just thinking you're in this similar, situation where you get, I'm sure, hundreds and thousands of requests, and you have to say no all the time. And so Henry's wisdom is, it just pay attention to what you say yes to.
Yeah, I think that's good because I
Yeah.
say yes to everything and then you're resentful. But
Buried.
I
Yeah.
think part of the thing again, the key, and I say this ad nauseum, is that you don't go to the margins to make a difference because then it's about me. But you go to the margins so that the folks there make me different. Then it's about us because it feels passive or something, but it isn't. It's the actual active stance at the margins, affectionate awe, which St. Ignatius of Loyola called acatamiento, affectionate awe. And you're there and you're allowing yourself to receive who they are. You're allowing your heart to be altered. You're allowing yourself to be reached by the folks there. And what it does is it's counterintuitive a little bit because we think we go there to fix, save, and rescue. But you're going there to have this exquisite mutuality where everybody is inhabiting their dignity and nobility in each other's presence. And it happens if you go there with that kind of, acatamiento, with that kind of affectionate awe that's humble, that's in receiving mode. But then people go, no, I'm the service provider, they're the service recipient. No, first of all, you'll burn out because it's about you and it's also about tally sheet. How do we tabulate our successes and evidence-based outcomes and all that kind of stuff? But really, no, it feels passive, and it's the opposite of passive. It's the active stance to allow yourself to listen and to love and to receive people. And
Let's,
so and
yeah.
then you don't burn out. That's the main thing is when people burn out, it's just that it's about them. They've allowed it to become about them.
I want to talk about that outcomes thing, because the work that we do in street medicine is the work of Sisyphus, right? It's the pushing the boulder up the mountain, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. And so you have some wisdom on this, that we don't talk about success, we don't talk about outcomes. What do we talk about?
We talk about being anchored in the present moment, putting one loving foot in front of the next. I have written extensively about my spiritual director, who's a gang member named Sergio. And every morning, we did it this morning, every morning, 7 days a week. We both get up impossibly early, and we read the readings of the day and we reflect on them. And then, but we just send a little thing out, 3 or 4 sentences. What struck you from the readings? And it kind of generates a kind of a mantra, or sometimes it's what direction my own prayer will go, and I don't know what it was. I think it was in the face of, National Guard going into Portland or Chicago or all this preposterous stuff. And you start to ask this question, what do we do now? Or what do we do next? And he wrote simply, love is always the next thing to do. And I thought it was brilliant. And it's true. And I think it's a thing that keeps you putting first things recognizably first and living as though the truth were true is by love will always be the next thing to do. And it feels squishy, but it isn't, because it's not squishy, because it's the thing that will keep you delighting in the person who's driving you crazy. And the goal is not to create a behaving community, but a community of cherished belonging. And by behaving community, it's sort of like, I don't want this person to be drunk when we walk up to them on the street, or high again, or not taking their medicine, or not tending to that wound that we've already explained to them. Here's how you can keep it from getting infected. This is our constant here. But I like today, I don't know why it was hard to keep, before I got here, it was hard today to kind of say, okay, now be present and be anchored and listen and love. And then you can do it. I mean, it's a gracious thing that somehow comes where you're not annoyed, which is otherwise what happens every single moment of our lives. But there was a moment I said, I'm going to delight in this guy who drives me absolutely out of my mind, because it's, but then I shifted and I caught myself, and I was really saying stuff from my heart about how important this guy is in my life. And it's oddly, it sort of blew him away, because I think he's used to trying to, convince me to give him some money or whatever it is. And I thought, well, I'm going to take time with him. And oh my God, I don't believe the thing, you can't teach old dogs new tricks. It's constant, and you're always kind of discovering all over again. Would that our commitment to the poor and compassion were a once and for all thing. And it just isn't. It's every single day. It's constant. So I always say cherishing is not hard. Remembering to cherish, that's hard, because you have to remind yourself every 10 minutes, see this person, hold this person, listen to this person, love this person. And it's hard to do.
You're making me think of a Dostoevsky quote that Dorothy Day loved, that love is a harsh and dreadful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is fantastic, and I want to ask you a specific question here for those that are practicing street medicine. Can you give us some words of hope and encouragement? We feel beaten down by the opioid crisis, beaten down by the mental illness, beaten down by the rising homelessness situation in the United States. Give us a word of hope and encouragement, please. We need it.
Well, I just think part of the problem is I've written about the whole success thing, but if the engine that drives you is to make progress, you will be frustrated. Don't let that be the goal. Don't let that guide you. Don't let it be the engine that drives you to do street medicine. Let the object and the engine be listen, love. Let that be the engine. Now, I guarantee you, if that's your engine, you'll make progress. But if the engine is to make progress, you'll only be frustrated. You will burn out. You'll be annoyed at the people you're privileged to accompany. And so it means we abandon, all desire to make progress or to be successful or to have, a good tally sheet,
Thank you.
So
listen,
I
listen, love, love.
Yeah, I borrow that from the Kairos retreat people, because when people come in and they're going to do a weekend retreat with prisoners, and they're nervous because what do I say to them? What do I do? And the leaders of Kairos always say, listen, listen, love, love. It's never about here's what you should say to them. It's just listen, listen, love, love. And I try to use that as a kind of a mantra when the next homie comes into my office, and it helps me,
And probably helps them.
Yeah.
So, so two final questions, and then we're going to let you get back to the work of Homeboy.
Okay.
If if you could end homelessness, how would you do it?
Well, I always look back to a friend of mine who works with homeless, who said, people don't become homeless because they run out of money. They become homeless because they run out of relationships. And I find that so resonant to the work here, that as long as you can just spend your day making sure that as best you can, nobody runs out of a relationship, because that's when, uh, things become difficult. But as long as you're in sort of an invested relational wholeness with people, now that's not a thing where you go, okay, let's programmatically or in a policy statement, but it talks about if people believe that everybody's unshakably good and we belong to each other, then what people will just saturate the world with is a longing to be in relationship. And then watch what happens with the unhoused. If we can get more hands on deck and people wanting to know the name of people, and how can you hold people, and how do you walk with people, and how do you listen better? And it's just, we are saved by relationship. And that's as true of people who are, in the substance use disorder world, as much as folks who forget to take their meds, or as much as those who are living in a tent just on a street behind us. Again, it's really hard to do, but it's what a noble, holy calling it is that all you folks are engaged in. Heroic.
Thank you. Thank you. And likewise. So, last big question is, if you could do one thing to make the world a better place, I mean, you're already doing it, but what would you do? Make the world a better place.
I think the world would be a better place if we part of our intention was to name things correctly, but also returning, I will say, as a Jesuit, as a priest, as a Christian. I was reading this morning Pope Leo's, whatever it was, declaration or something. I guess it was begun by Francis and he finished it. But he has this one line, and it was like, he says, go back and reread the gospel. It's a simple line, but it's like, you want to go, if you embrace mass deportation, go back and reread the gospel. If you think it's okay, for ICE raids and people to be terrified, go back and reread the gospel. If you think lives don't matter if they're living in a tent on Main Street behind our building, go back and reread the gospel. For me, as a refrain, it was like, yes, because then it's the marrow. It's the marrow of the gospel. And then it says, I will take seriously what Jesus took seriously, which are four things: inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, and compassionate acceptance. And so then you find yourself that narrow is the way. And you go, okay, I want this to stay narrow for me. And which is to say, cling and adhere to the marrow of the gospel, which says, mean and cruel is not strong and tough, but, deciding that love is always the next thing to do is a visionary stance that the world could use at the moment.
I think it's appropriate to say amen to that. And Father Greg Boyle, thank you for joining us today. You
Michael,
get to go back. You get to go back into the fray.
You were an oasis in my days. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Come and visit.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And thank you to our listeners. This has been Streetside, the official podcast of the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals included and are not representative of the opinions of the Street Medicine Institute or the Street Medicine Institute Student Coalition. Do not use this podcast as medical advice and instead see your own provider for medical care.